the chair. So. What's funny is after you put aside your technique, and you've done 1,000 shots and 10,000 shots, and you develop your coach shot, develop your fade, develop your different combat techniques. What you have to then play with, learn to master is your mindset. So I call it the combat mind, the mental game. Thank you, man. Since Ingrid's class kind of dovetails into it, we'll kind of talk about our approaches a little differently. We have different ways to describe it, but I think what you'll find is that there are commonalities and truths in how we approach it, and I think we'll go through shortly. So I'm going to go through a minute or so. One of the first things that I want to make sure that we talk about is the concept of training. We train ourselves to find a certain level. At a certain point in time, you can get no other information processing in your head or body. You need to know when you're basically at a point where you can't gather more information. In our school of fighting, we call your cup is full. Here's the concept. You have a cup, keep more water in there, and at some point in time, it's full to the top. You don't retain anything. So part of training is, the training talking about is knowing when you no longer can retain or get anything new into your head without pouring some water out into your head. How many times I practiced and you said, I just don't get it. And then you basically got over the top. Knowing that is the key and not going beyond.
Hey, what's up?
Here for you.
Here, why don't you put your stuff back here?
I think one of the first technique was kind of start with McGill's approach to the fight itself, and then we'll kind of go back to prepare for the fight. You know, you start us off with your steps.
Yeah, I mean, okay. Be happy to have this. Has anybody taken this class before?
Half of it, I think.
You have, John?
Only part of it, I think.
Which two part?
The beginning part, I can't. It was like 2 years ago, I think so.
Okay, so we taught this off and on for a while. I don't remember the years. I'm just smarter than I am, but it's been a while. Has anybody else taken it? I'd like to know if you how it set with you the last time, and if you were able to put into play any of the things. And you were only a part of it, but I know that some people have taken it several times. And the one critical thing here is that you can sit in all of these classes and all of these fine dons and his kindness can share the wisdom. But I find that oftentimes the gap is somewhere in between somebody saying something and you taking it to heart and doing it. And I think that if we taught nothing else, it would be whatever it is that you have learned today, actually give it a really good shot. I mean, that would be the number one mental aspect, or we call this tactical and strategic fighting. We used to call it the mental game. But that would be the number one thing, because you've probably all been sitting in there listening to some really excellent fighters of all different types and sorts. And they all have different ideas and thoughts and strategies and tactics and things like that. But at the kernel of them, they work for them for some reason. And if you would think about what it is and how that relates to your fighting, you probably walk out of any instructional class like this that much better. So that's the first thing I want to ask. So is there anything that you remember from the class that you were able to put into practice and go, this is great, or this did not work for me at all? I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I don't remember a super specific thing. I know that over the last years I've really been working on my mental game and trying to talk to as many different people about it, and watching interviews with other athletes. And so, yes and no, I guess, sort of.
The way I've written this up originally, it talks about some very high-level things and then it kind of drills down into the details of it. But all with the general concept that this is not a class that preaches any specific technique. It's not a dagger class or even really a light weapons class at all. It's just a class about how you look at combat and how you start high and drill in, and how with some exercises and some mental approaches to it, you can improve your game, whatever that game is. And so that's why we do this as a panel, because I want it to be clear that it's not how Miguel and Brendan fight, or how Monius fights, or et cetera, et cetera. And it's what is fighting, and what can you do to make your better. Anybody have any questions? I'd like to kind of just do this one a little more, because it's a fairly small group. We've got some, I think maybe this would benefit some discussion. Okay. Please, say it to people. You want to not take short time?
Since we're talking about it, we start with the first thing to know who you are. If you had to process yourself as an element, which element would you be? Fire, earth, wind, water. The flavor to your fighting. You fight with passion, and you let the anger in you, the emotion you dictate your fight. Are you earth, where you basically get into a pillbox position and take all comers and break themselves on your defense? Are you air, continually defending, and taking the shot when you need to? Are you water, basically always moving forward, the extra bleed, soft when need to be, hard when need to be? There's no right or wrong, but the key is to know what you are, and to practice the other elements, to see what the other person you're fighting approaches their initial element is, and to match them or know how to break them.
Yeah. So filling in on Monius' point there, it's really good to know your element, but it's also good to know what your opponent's element is. So, and we'll get back to this, and I'll go through kind of a table of contents kind of view of it. But what Monius is Monius is a type of fighter. What are you?
Water.
Okay.
I used to be fire when I was hungry and coming up as cadet.
Yeah. I'm more of an earth guy myself now, to some extent. You know,
when you started on stage, you were fire as well.
I was so fiery because you'd see light on and I was in their shorts and out the other end. And then, but it's not just how much you're attacking, it's a mindset. But what I've found over the years is that what I'm best at is being whatever is worse for my opponent. Because if I go against his grace over there with fire, it does no good whatsoever at all. And so, but knowing that doesn't necessarily mean that I'll be able to beat him. But it does mean that I know that that doesn't work very well. So what ideally I recommend for anybody is know your strengths. But then, compared to what your opponent is doing, know what their main weaknesses is, and if you can adapt to that and give them their weakness. If you can present their worst fight to them all the time, your best fight doesn't have to beat their best fight. Yeah. And I have a better heavy example, and please anybody, if you've got an example to do, I've got a better heavy example than I'm going to do a light weapons, honestly. In heavy weapons, Duke Drake was very hard for most people to beat. And my concept of fighting Drake was that if you tried to fight Drake in the way that Drake wanted you to, you would 99% of the time lose. So what I did was I developed a style that would put Drake out of his #1 fighting style. And I found that he really didn't have a #2 fighting style. So I gained a significant advantage over his grace because he was so successful with that one fighting style that he did that he would never adapt to mine because I was the only guy that did it. So it was great for me, and I shared it to people from time to time, but the point being is that he had one particular type of style that worked very, very well, and you would lose fighting it. So, I mean, you put your ego aside and fight the fight that's going to win you.
So, expanding on what Miguel was talking about, if you can get somebody out of their comfort zone, push an advantage, right? how to do it. And that's really what this class focuses on, is understanding what does that mean when I'm putting them out of their comfort zone. And that's how I learned how to be Miguel, is I took him out of his primary fencing, his breaker game, and focused on how do I get around Miguel's best game so I can execute what I do well at the same time of putting him in a position that wasn't in his best interest.
Yeah. Against a good fighter, it's not that kill switch. It's not a, I can do this and it'll throw them off their game. And if I run at them and go, wah, go ahead and shut them down. That may happen to a couple people if you get lucky, but most people are more subtle than that. You know, if I go and run from a certain direction, you start getting worked up there, everything's wild, and open, and that's the way to do that.
So when Muddies and I used to go at it, and we faced each other a lot back in the day, Muddies' primary defense, from what I saw, was he had a good solid defense, and he had a ward. His ward came out when he wasn't really feeling the love on the defense. He didn't feel his defense was right there, ready to execute. So what I had to do is I had to get him in a situation where he felt he was defended and wasn't warding, but he wasn't as defended as he felt. That's what I worked on. Same token, Modius tried to get me out of my comfort zone of being in control of the range, where I couldn't necessarily do what I do best, which is a little bit more bouncing around the field, so to speak. You want to expand on that, Modius?
Actually, I was going to give
Yeah, I have a more recent example this last round. Seth, for example, Sven. Sven is, oh my God, devastating. He's walking forward at you with his quarantine. If he's coming forward at you, run. Go get a ballista. I don't care. Okay. So, knowing that, I put him on his heels. I made him fight me backing up. I didn't back up when he came at me. I stepped in and forced him to go backwards and defend. As long as he was defending, he couldn't kill me. That's the earth, air, fire, water element that we're talking about. I normally go forward anyway, but in this particular case, it's a scary situation. You're walking into a Cuisinart. It's not the normal line of thinking when you face him.
Your Honor, question for you. When did you decide to fight him like that?
2 years ago.
Yeah. So that's what I wanted to hit on, is that this course originally taught things from a three-tiered standpoint. And the first, and really it's from a military standpoint, the entire one. It taught strategy, tactics, and then really kind of a micro-tactic kind of process. And they're all very important. I would say most SCA fighters tend to live just in the tactical. But
the trick. This will work for you.
and it's good.
Number one.
And they fight the same fight against everybody, and they win a certain amount of fights, and it's fairly predictable how many they're going to win and that kind of thing, because that's the whole effort that went to. But His Highness and others look at somebody's fighting and they break it down and they say, well, what can I do? What works well for my opponent? And what can I do to combat that? That is strategy. And strategy is the highest level of the hierarchy of fighting logic, right? And the middle tier is tactics, where you're on the field and your opponent shifts right. What do? You shift left, you go forward. In this case, is fence coming at you? Do you go away? Because that seems the same thing to do, but by observation from a strategy standpoint, he had observed that people standing there or going back were dying like flies. So, well, what's the other direction we can go? Into them. And so you build a strategy around it. Right?
The strategy started in a fire practice, and it was actually a pickups topic. And he started fighting with me, and I got into my normal against a lefty or frontier stance, and he was just pummeling me. So I switched stance right then, and that completely changed the aspect of the entire fight.
Change the flow.
Changed everything, and he did not adapt. To this day, he still hasn't adapted to that style. Okay. So, during the course of a fight, in sometime in the near future, he's going to, and I'm going to have to readapt on the fly. But that's something in the near future, and I know he's going to do it. Okay, that's the thing. So I'm already thinking ahead as to what it is that I'm going to do when he finally does adapt to that. So this.
Opponents, bad guys, they're always the bad guys, right? Oh, those guys are so bad, I'm going to beat them, and this is how I'm going to do it. And they do that by a number of things. And I've got some written down here of pre-tournament preparations, pre-bout preparations, and pre-attack preparations. And so this gets into the strategy tactics and really that micro tactics within a fight, which is really just more tactics, but I wanted a different name for it. So, can anybody mention or come up with some things that you do prior to a tournament to get ready for it? We've already covered one, which is analyze your opponents. You think it's like 2 or 3 things that you can do?
So like the day before or like months before?
Months before, in preparation. This is pre-tournament.
Oh.
So it could be the day, week before, sometimes.
Okay. Yeah, well then you probably get into better shape, maybe you start running, you just fight a lot more, I would say. Do maybe a specific drill, if that's a new move you think will work really well, so you can practice that specifically.
Right?
Find as many different people as possible.
Good.
Why would you want to do that?
Give variety. Each of them are going to have different styles, and you're going to have to adjust each one.
Intel logbook. You also keep your fighting book. It basically says, when I fought Joe, Joe has a tendency to fade this way. He's a high energy fighter, likes to pill blocks, doesn't have a lot of movement. You're going to try this and this, or this work against it.
I actually had a book of my opponents, and I would write down every time I fought them, anything they did do. And I had 200 fighters in this book. Okay. I've since internalized it. I can go through, on the rapier field or the heavy, I can go through my mental Rolodex and pull up the last 3 times I fought someone and go through that fight. Almost blow for blow before a tournament.
And now you'll basically say he'll fight like X.
Yes.
So he has the archetypes.
I don't do it to your extent. I used to do it to his, especially before tournaments. I had the problem that I had to stop doing it. And this is something we should talk about later, but I have a really good ability to visualize. And when I visualize fighting in my head, I get adrenaline surges. So if I think about things or kind of tournament, I actually get sick for weeks before the tournament. So I shut that part of my brain off for the most part anymore. But I have the last several fights with his Highness, and I'm not even active at fighting anymore. I haven't lifted anything seriously in 10 years or so. But it's just habit of, well, the last time I fought His Highness, he got in on me and wore me out and did these internal moves, and we could discuss it at length because I have a very good memory of it. But I know how I'm going to fight. And some of it was what you were saying, which is train, exercise, lose weight, stretch, and record yourself fighting. To your point, what you had said reminded me of you. Brendan, when he was training, we were training, I don't know, 3 or 4 days a week or whatever, and he was getting really, really good at fighting me, and his skill, his percent of fighting me was going up and up and up and up.
The key part of that phrase is him.
Exactly. And then he'd go out to tournaments, and some, or an expression, schmo, would kill him. It was like, what the hell? It was like, what just happened there? And it's that diversity, because you have the nuance of fighting different people.
I would interject. I think that knowing the elements and being prepared and being relaxed enough to be able to take in and change. The other point is, as part of the fight, in understanding and preparing and visualizing, is mastering energy modulation in yourself as a pre-preparation. So the concept is that if, for example, Brendan, stand up for a second. And yet, this is a pre-tournament practice technique. So if I do this and I do this, I'm not saying I have any energy. I'm just saying I'm here, whatever. And then you flip the switch. That's energy modulation. On the other side, I can be here. And then work up, and then drop it down to neutral and hide your actions and spark at that point in time. But that's something that only comes in pre-preparation, so that's where I would put that knowledge of energy modulation as a technique. You can't do that day of, but the knowledge of energy modulation, then he'll go, okay, follow you up on the dial.
And we have a different name for that as well, and it's actually in here.
So something I do a little differently, I don't really have a mental Rolodex of anybody. I mean, I can recall how I fight Modius, but what I don't try to focus on is previous fights. I actually try to analyze people on the fly that day because people's fighting style changes, they age, whatever the reason, it doesn't really matter, but they fight differently. And they fight differently enough that it can have a big impact on the way you fight. And it's because I got locked into how to fight Miguel, so I had trouble actually learning how to adapt. So what I didn't learn particularly well at that point in my career was I did not learn how to have that mental picture of how to beat Modius. I just had to figure out how was Modius fighting because I didn't particularly work that particular way. My mind didn't work that way and I could not function that way. So I literally had to learn how to analyze people on the moment.
Well, here's the thing too. And
Something I'd like to jump in with some of what's been.
At this point, and then, so to what he was saying is that what he was doing was getting really good at what my weaknesses were. But then that not directly translate into everybody else's weaknesses. So we worked on things like point control, on speed, and minimizing the telegraphs, and all of the things that you're supposed to. But at the same time, he was really analyzing how to get in on me specifically. And so you can do that with teaching people specific actions. There's probably taught a dagger class today, so you learn dagger techniques. But whenever you learn a new thing, remember that that thing was not built in absence of everything else. So even though somebody else uses that particular style really, really well, it's built around a framework which you may not have. So using that framework, that particular style, trick, tip, whatever, right off the bat, may not go as smoothly as you would like. And so you may have a learning curve where you're actually worse for a while in something that you learn until you can adapt it into a whole.
And that's the truism. Everyone here collects information, but at some point in time you're going to tip away from the table going, I have to process on the fly. And for me, that normally happens right I know I just open myself up to the fight during the fight. I may going to say, how does this person fight, just so I can kind of plug in some intel into my head. But I and everyone at this part of the room has moved away from the combat book. But you've got to start somewhere. You've got to formalize the process and then step away going, okay, at some point in time you just got to press go and flow.
Now I want to add to what Modius just said right there. This is not absence of intel. If Modius has already fought Miguel or Gon or whoever else out there, I'm not going to discard the fact that he's already faced him and I can find out what's he doing today. But you have to take that at your own risk and understand that what he throws against Modius may not be what they throw against you. So you have to be able to take that information and adapt it to your particular situation and how they are going to adjust to how they fight you.
We've kind of covered a couple of topics, and we're kind of going into the second topic, which was about whether or not you're, looking, figuring out long term how people fight. And we're kind of getting to the other side of that. The other, I want to hit that some too, but also we're talking about one approach. That's a very valid approach. Is making your opponent uncomfortable, finding his weak spots and things like that. Sometimes your opponent's weak spots, and this is one of the methods I use to beat people, is find out where they're comfortable. You comfortable? Right now, you comfortable?
Sure.
Yeah, if I was to walk by you and hit you with a sword, maybe do it, because you're comfortable. You're not really expecting to get hit. You're not really worried about me right now. It's a pretty good time to hit him, wouldn't it?
He's Mr. Danger.
But on the field, you get people, if you can help them to relax, that puts them, that can put them in a more vulnerable situation than they actually recognize. Frequently, most of the time I meet people, it's not about manipulating them, it's not about scaring the crap out of them or getting about finding out what do you really want to do? What do you like to do? How about you do it right now? Thank you. Victor to English. It's really, what do you want to do? Okay, what can I do with that? And that's stuff you figure out on the fly, which, getting to that part, I've never been one that really sat down and wrote down stuff about people and really learned how people fight, especially because we fought the hell out of each other over the years. But generally what works best for me, and again, the other approaches are valid, but there are flip sides to all of it. What works best for me is what we've kind of been moving to, which is, who are you and what are you doing today? When I'm fighting, I want to know what you're doing today. What you did 2 years ago, don't care. Because guess what? That guy's a year younger than you are now. Some of the younger guys might be a couple inches shorter. Some of the older guys might be slower, might be faster. You never know.
But it doesn't balance the strategy aspect of it.
Yeah.
And you live in the moment when you're on the battlefield and you have to make adjustments, but you need to do the preparations ahead of time. And however you do it, whether you're doing it mentally or you're writing it down. I have my squires and such try to write things down because it puts it in place where you can go back and reference it. You should know where your opponent hit you last, where your opponent, where you hit your opponent, things like that. We'll get into that in a minute. I want to hit this to a high level for that. We were talking about pre-tournament preparations, training. I'll just read through real quick. Training, exercise, lose weight, stretch. Record yourself fighting. Record or study other fighters. Learn to perfect all of the shots possible. Increase your speed. Minimize telegraphs. So, if you thought there wasn't a whole lot you could do ahead of time, there is. Learn the best defenses for all attacks coming at you. Develop a new technique. Get a longer weapon. Get a lighter weapon. Some of these things that we're using these days are pretty, but they're bricks. If you weigh 135 pounds and you're using an 8-pound weapon, you're not going to be very fast with that thing. Buy better shoes. Don Valentine, when I first started working with him, he was so fast and you would never know it because he was using such slippery shoes that he just couldn't get through. He looked like a cartoon animal, trying to run. So, formulate a list of people you have difficulty beating. Because I had a list of 200. I used to keep a list of like 5 or something like that. But it was the people that I was most concerned with at the time. List each fighter's major strengths and weaknesses. Is he faster or slower than him, a greater or lesser reach, overconfident, frustrated easily, fatigued easily, frightened easily, a natural or highly trained fighter, going to call the shot that I expect him to. And I'd like to have a discussion about that. And what of the 7 virtues or sins to be possessed, which we'll talk about later. You have to know this going in, and especially, all of the things that you can so easily do ahead of time. We don't all have time to work out all the time, but you can stretch, you can build your speed up, you can see if the shoes that you're wearing are making a big difference. There's a lot of little bit easy things on this list that you guys can just do. Analyze your equipment. Is the jerkin that you're wearing, a doublet that you're wearing, pulling when you're fighting? Does it look good on you, but it makes it too stiff for you to move? Are your shoes really pretty, but they're too slippery? Is there too much traction, so when you're trying to do an explosive forward movement, they stop you getting your traction through off balance? So think about your rig, your clothes, your preparation, the things that you can easily do. You can sit here while you're watching television and do point control practice. So there's a ton of things. This is a partial list of things that you can do well before a tournament comes up to be ready, more so than just walking out on site and going, hey, I'm feeling pretty good today. I wonder how my opponent's are. So what do you think of that?
So from my perspective, you can perfect techniques to 10,000 repetitions. That is for martial arts. Bottom line is, that should be done beforehand, so by the time you get to the fight, everything else goes away in the fight. For me, I may do preparations, but when the fight happens, the mindset that I try to do is go into the mindset called no mind. So basically, you react without thinking, so there's less hesitation on your actions, and it just processes. So I may know that he closes, or he steps away or fades back, but in the fight, I just let my mind go still and empty. Because what I want the line between the inaction and action to be instantaneous. And the closer that is together, the more likely you'll have a good, successful shot, encounter, effective defense, whatever the case may be. So by stilling the mind and allowing your training to kick in. Now, if you have to say, okay, at lunge, I'm going to put my blade pen, follow my blade forward, well, then at that point in time, you're not going to be in no mind. And the only way to do that is you'll never do that in a tournament. You can only do that throughout preparing for a tournament.
Absolutely. That was going to be the point I was going to interrupt with. You want to be in no mind in the tournament, but you can't be in no mind if you have not prepared. If you are worried about something, the way you're moving your opponent, you don't know the shot types that your opponent throws.
Oh God, they're going to rush me. When are they going to rush me?
If the lizard brain in the back of your head doesn't know how to deal with all of these situations, you will not reach no mind. You'll reach panic. Sometimes panic's helpful, you do that, but it's all a preparation thing to get to the point where within the fight, you have that cool, that calm, that no mind state.
So, how many people have been to a practice? It's 2 weeks before Queens and 8 new people show up. You haven't ever seen them before, you don't know who they are. Okay, with the exception of guys like this, most of these guys are not, to say that are training for Queens is a joke. So, back in the day, back when I used to train 3 and 4 days a week, I went to practice one day and it was 2 weeks after Queens and somebody, I don't know, you kind of wonder how you get on these topics sometimes, but they pretty much asked me why I was there, and I was like, I'm training for Queens. They're like, well, you're a little late. I go, no, Queens is in 25 weeks. I have 25 weeks to train for the next one. And I have 51 weeks to train for the next one. I'm training for Queens every day. Don't assume that you can go out there and train 1 or 2 times and do something great. In general, I would imagine that almost everybody here has trained at one point in their career between 3 and 5 days a week. I would make that bad right there.
There's a truism. If you want to be crowned a Queen's champion, if you train 3 days a week for a year, 2 years, you'll achieve your goal if you have a basic skill set.
Oh, the right trainers.
Right trainers, but that's the way you do it. There's your secret right there. Go, we're done.
Who all here, so 2 questions to the group. First of all, who all here has, not necessarily right now, but trained 3 or more times a week? Did you notice the difference when you went from below that to 3 or 4? The change in pace of your learning. It's striking, isn't it? If you're a once a week kind of guy or girl, you can kind of keep things going, but you're really not going to learn like you would if you were 5 days a week.
I mean, who here thinks that, I know a lot of you guys weren't around, but a lot of people have only seen Miguel now. Back in the day, he's probably one of the most natural fighters that I've ever encountered. But even when he was up and coming, I think you practiced 3 days a week, weren't you? With Galen and regular practice?
Yeah, 4 or 5 days a week, because we didn't have a whole lot of money, so when we got bored, we'd go like fence and tennis courts and stuff, just my group of friends.
And I remember a lot of the conversations around, well, he's just natural. Dude, you just have to, seriously, the greatest fighters that I've ever seen, Duke Inman, Miguel, Modis, the greatest fighters, Duke Aaron, the greatest fighters I've ever seen, every one of them they've all got one thing in common. They train a lot. And they fight. And they fight as much as they can, and they take, believe it or not, they spend a lot of time losing to learn how to win.
I grew up with a lot of bruises. Growing up, I spent the first 5 years, and I got serious and I would spend 4 days a week training with different folks, and I can't tell you how many bruises I got. Hard, ugly, because I was going out and fighting the best that I could find. And I'd go to tournaments on weekends, and before the tournament started, between rounds, after the fights were over, after the tournament was over, I was doing pickups. The crowd would send runners over to tell me to stop doing pickups because they were fixing the whole court. Yes, I was from the Western region, and we didn't have a whole lot of high-level fighters out there to learn from. But this is how you get better. You go and fight, and you fight, and you fight. And not only do you fight, but you fight the top-level fighters. You go and fight Miguel. You go and fight Brendan. You go and fight Monique. You go and fight Ingrid. You go fight the top-tier fighters. And you say, teach me something.
And you learn from it, and you log it down.
Yes, and then you go back to where you came from, and you teach everybody around you what they just taught you.
By making them better, it takes the whole ship alive. I mean, I'm a product of the fact that Christopher and Wolfgang and Aaron and Donovan, they were my practice. So that was my one practice a week. I could go to multiple all the time. But then I went to the weekends and I taught them, which is another practice, because it was a real fight practice. It was, you know, I know the whole bar. Those were my two practices a week. And that's why I never was quite their level, because I had other things to dealing with the ESC at the same time. No excuses, but choices. But when I fought them, I had to use different techniques as well on the fly. Not an excuse for this thoughts.
Yeah.
Michael of Monmouthshire, Mayor, Count William Miesco, Sir Frederick, they hated it when I showed up because they knew that I was going to come pick on them and make them fight hard their whole time that we were doing pickups.
Can't imagine Michael moaning you more.
Well, he did because he was tired. And I would make him more tired. And then I wouldn't let him go.
I remember one of those practices where you walk up to a tournament or an open practice, and I'd walk up and Shay would go, "Oh my God, are you really here?" "Yeah, I'm here to practice. Are you?" "Well, I hadn't intended." "Yeah, but I need to practice, and you're here."
I'd go kick over their shields. I'd go, if they had their helmets off, I'd go whack their helmet with my stick and say, "Oh, that's what that feels like."
When I was hungry, I would park myself in front of people and say, "You fight," and they said, "No, I'm not." I'd put their arm together in front of them, like a dog. And go, "Come on, you got one fight in you." "I'm not going to fight." "Well, I don't care, I just want to fight you." So, there are times where I'm not the most active in terms of rapier at this point in time. I have other things to focus on as well, but I can put my hands in it. But I will tell you, I see fighters standing on the list field, on the shiv, on the rapier side, with their arm on, baseball, Crowley going tap tap. That's his mating call. Or Aaron going whack whack on his shield, and that's basically no one's fighting them. And if you want to know how to get better, that's your second practice in the week. At a tournament, you're already there. Put the armor on and do it. But without that, I mean, you can't travel to Dallas to fight with Miguel if he shows up in practice. But if he's a tournament and you browbeat him and make him feel guilty, or say, Moniz, would you make Aaron or Miguel fight me? Sure, we'll fight. He'll bitch, but at some point in time he'll go, okay, I'm going to start putting some points on this person, and that's when you start learning because he starts pushing an envelope on you.
Miguel works really well. I'd like to take a step back and we talked about having this a little more interactive. So I'd like to go back to the pre-training preparations and ask each one of you here to think of a pre-training preparation that you could do, at the list that I said, whether it's guard or weight or stretching or anything like that you could do, that you think that would be of the most value to you for the next tournament that you enter, unless it's like next week or whatever. And you could even start that early. But if you've got something coming up that you'd like to do well in a couple of weeks, from 1 out, what one thing, just want to ask one thing of you that you could do beforehand that would help you out. And if you want to be lazy about it, buy a new pair of shoes, do that. But if you want to do multiple things, that would be great. So think of one thing. Miguel, I'm going to throw this at you. I'm going to pick this job a little bit. Is there one thing that you think
maybe even as scary good as you guys are, what could you do before the next tournament?
I think for me personally, it's at practice focusing on the mindset as if I was in a tournament, because I think that's the one thing that's kind of that next level, that next step for a tournament mindset, for that, the combat mind, being able to go into a tournament and know that I'm bringing my A game, my A+ game, not just my, oh, I'm feeling okay today, being able to turn that on, turn that switch, have control of that energy modulation kind of.
How will you do that?
How do I do that?
How?
At practice, turning it all the way up, practicing being in control of my mindset.
So the key in practice is turning on and off.
Exactly.
And
So if I'm teaching someone, and then later in the practice I go and fight John, or I fight somebody else, I fight Gore, I fight Kelly, somebody that's at our practice that I know I can fight all out against as if I was in a tournament, being able to turn that on, being able to be in full control of my mindset and my fight.
Something that I would suggest for that is even with actually each opponent, somewhere in the middle, but pick 2 or 3 and just turn it all the way on,
Pick and choose.
get the wins, and then turn it back down to work on your game, their game, that sort of thing. But be able to go and do it with each opponent, because even brand new fighters present a different set of problems than top end fighters. And everything in between gives you a different look. You need to be able to deal with that and just flick the switch, work it, and
Absolutely. I think usually the tactic that Dory has talked to us about is the first 3 or 4 fights that you do with someone, turn it all the way on. Because that's what it's going to be like in a tournament. You don't want to do that when somebody says, okay, 3 more fights at the end here. Don't turn it on that. You've already fought it. You've already practiced.
Actually, the true is to do it around. You need to say, I will do it now.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I will do it now.
Something, Miguel and I had this discussion earlier, and we were talking about a specific concept. And my opinion on turning it off and on is it's an extremely advanced concept. Most fighters are incapable of, they only have either all the way on, or I'm getting the crap beat out of me by everybody. That's all they've got. And it took me a long time to learn it. And so my stance is usually, until you're ready to learn that, my recommendation is to just go out there and fight as hard as you can. I did this for years. There was no turning mode. It was just practice mode at tournament, or tournament mode at practice, however you want to look at it. I didn't really have it off and on because I was unable to dial it down in increments. I could only dial it down into sucking.
So I want to get back on this and test the group a little more on some of these things. Because I think that if you don't own up to some of these, if you're not thinking about it now and what to do, and we don't put you on the spot, I don't think you're going to take it back and do anything with it. You're going to think, well, that was a fun class. Those old guys are pretty amusing. But, and then you're not going to do it. So, but I swear that these things actually work. But one thing I want to bring up, because he brought it up, is if you are going out there, and this is for all of the non-starters, actually it's it for everybody in the room. If you go out to fight someone, you need to be very clear with those people, especially if you're looking for a white award of whatever field it is, that when you're out there to learn something new, when you're out there to test something, when you're out there working on something, you need to be very clear with them that that's exactly what you're doing. Because if you go out there and you're playing around or you're working on something, and that Don or Mike or whoever beats you 90% of the time, and you're like, I'm working on something, you haven't told him, that he thinks you're terrible. And then every time they talk about the circle, I tear him up. And you're like, I was playing at 20% speed with my left hand. But sure you were. But if you, so it's very important that you say, I'm working on something, I'm not trying to gunch against you right now, I'm working on this, help with you.
Before the fight.
Before the fight.
Before the fight.
And then when you want to share you want to show your skill level, saying, I want your best fight because I'm going to give you mine because I want to kind of get a gauge of how I'm progressing with the stuff I'm working on. And then when you do that, you need to be absolutely on like it's police champion. Because first of all, it's a good mental exercise for you. And two, you want this person to have the actual level in their head of, or his or her head, of what your skill level is at that point. It's so important to have this because you get people that are pretty casual folks like Tristan, and he'd get out there and dig around with you. And then you think, oh, Tristan's not all that good. Oh my God, Tristan's really good. But you don't.
Then he sparks.
Yeah, he'll spark.
A number of years ago, Miguel was at practice, and when I fought Miguel, I wanted him to beat me as much as he could. I didn't want his second best game. I wanted him to fight as hard as he could. but not everybody is capable of being trounced. So he was out there and he was fighting a guy, and, you know, perception is everything, right? It doesn't matter about reality. 50-50, 70-30, doesn't really matter. All that matters is what that person feels. End of the day, he went probably 70-30. He counted 50-50, doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, he thought he was doing pretty well. Miguel wasn't fighting him that hard because his perception was off and because he didn't walk out there going, Miguel, I need to see kind of where I am with you, so I want to see your best game. One of the things I do at practice is I'll ask a person that is not new. If it's somebody that's obviously been coming to practice a little bit, I'll say, you know, are you training or do you want me to just fight you? Because they're different. If we're going to fight, I'm going to beat you as much as I can. If we're training, different mode, I'm not going to bring, there's no reason to bring out and beat somebody up that is working on something that doesn't work. It's not effective.
And I apologize, I keep saying that I'm going to ask you guys something, but I want to feed off of that and then really get back to you. It's also very important that, following up on what Brendan was saying, is that when you are instructing someone, if you want them to listen, many people need to have the living crap beaten out of them in a painful way if possible. But a lot of times will not listen to you if they think that you are not much better than they are. It's human nature. It's sad because then as you age, you still have to kind of crank it up higher and higher when you're trying to instruct. But especially for you guys who are on the path to being a white scarf, when you're working with new people and they want to fight, per Brendan's comment, say, do you want me to fight you or are you looking for some training? And be very clear when you're teaching as well that you are not fighting with these people. It's just you want to level set with everybody, both the people that you're working with from you training them and also people who are making decisions about you. Sure. Now, quick question. We had talked about this list of, dieting, exercising, changing shoes and garden, stuff like that. Does anyone in this room, can anyone tell a story about something that they did that they didn't think anything of it at the time, but they changed something and went to a tournament and was like, wow, I was so much better. Does anybody have anything?
I don't know if it's really something that I noticed at a tournament, but when I was going to high school, I didn't do a lot of weightlifting. And after I graduated from college and had a little bit of free time, I started weightlifting a lot. And as a female, it's a little bit harder to deal with some of the inner blaze. And man, after I put on some muscle, it was so much easier to do what I needed to do just to get out there and fence like you should. I don't know how much of a problem it is for guys. I mean, you're naturally have more muscle and can handle things like that. But as a woman, it was impressive the change that I saw.
And so, since you're chatting, is there anything on the list that you can think of that maybe, and I know you're living in Alaska, so that's a little different, but is there anything that comes to mind that you think, well, maybe I can work on X before I go out again?
Yeah, like I mentioned, just being able to go out and train would be probably the first thing. But when I did train more regularly, the mental game I think was the biggest thing for me. I tend to get pretty spun up. I'm really competitive, and so yeah, sometimes I just get too wound up about things. I need to, I think, manage my energy level better.
Okay.
So,
None of us are competitive.
yeah.
So what would happen if somebody came to you, started energy wrapping up, you'd follow them up? And then if they talk to you mid-fight, start talking to you.
I think I would follow their energy level, but if they started like verbally trying to mess with me, I completely blew it off. Like that seems obvious to me.
Yeah, people don't do that. I don't think people do that. Do people do that anymore? No. Just talk to them mid-fight?
Yeah,
Have you ever fought?
So anybody else have anything that they came to mind that they're thinking about that they might want to work on for that next tournament? If you don't have something now, that's fine, but think through it as part of the preparation.
I'll give you guys an example. So I took a hiatus, and when I came back, for those that know my fighting style, a lot of my normal reactions were just simply gone. So I came to this event for this class, but also specifically to work with somebody that I knew they would understand what attacks that I needed to start wiring in my triggers. Because I have certain attacks that kind of flow off of certain movements that I I have the expectation for them to be there, and when they just don't happen, I don't really have a backup plan because I'm expecting the wiring to be there. So I came here specifically to start rewiring those reactions because I know where my holes are. So it's very important that you understand when we're talking about this stuff, that you understand what you bring to the game and what you don't, what you do well and what you don't, what gets you hit and what triggers your best defense. Because when I come out there, I'm going to be looking to find out what triggers your best defense, and I'm going to be looking for what triggers your worst. Because I'm going to be exploiting the latter of those two.
I will go a step further and not be as nice and lived out and basically say, I want you each to work on do energy modulation through your next tournament. But more importantly, I want you to learn to still your body. You know, I come from a school of training that you don't do the necessary mode of tapping. If you're tapping, tap for a reason. That's why many times I'm finding somebody else say, well, why are you tapping my blade? I'm just doing to see what happens. Well, God, I can accept that. You just tap the blade just to see if something reacts without having a purpose behind it. That's a completely other reason. The more you still your body and give nothing except tranquil water, when you spark, it's unseen. That's what I want you to practice for the next couple of cycles. In terms of still your body, and then ask your opponent, which I do, did you see the shot coming? And that's where you will truly be able to develop your combat mind before the fight. So when you still yourself, you're getting rid of all the unnecessary motion, twitches, jerky stuff.
Okay. Yeah, so I thought you were talking about one thing originally, but so he's talking about two concepts that are in this paper. One is energy efficiency, and the other one that you started talking about originally, which is like the tapping and various things like that. The one is part of the list of things that I call like seven virtues, seven deadly sins. So one is things that you can do to get inside the head of your opponent to create openings. The other one is really about being efficient and not telegraphing.
Still your body, not telegraphing.
Yeah. So let's talk. What do you want to talk about first? Telegraphing?
Let's talk about telegraphing, which goes to still your body. That's the effect you want to achieve.
So right now, let's get up here real quick and show. So, Modis is talking about energy efficiency, and that has two things, two major components to it. One is that, first of all, it's you want to conserve energy, but yeah. So you want to conserve energy from the standpoint of saving energy. But there's another component about energy that you can notice. Heat is a form of energy, correct? Right? If you see heat, what's going on? Well, work is being done and energy is being created. But it's visible, it's traceable. And so anytime that you are doing extra work, you are giving extra signals that people can read. So if I'm facing off against Brendan here, and I'm like this, and I'm squared like this, I'm doing two major things wrong. This is not even getting the entire part of it. But the one is that in order for me to hit him, I have to take my arm from way back here, use all of these large muscle groups, and shove the arm at him, which is not very efficient, right? So this is not as efficient. The second thing is that he sees me having to pull my arm from all the way back up here to there, giving him additional time and visual cues in order to beat it. So I'm going to try from here to hit Brendan. He had blocked it before he even got there.
But to be fair, off-time attacks do work to some, and that's what sometimes it blows.
Which gets into our seven deadly sins and seven virtues. So we'll get onto that in a second. But if I come at it from the standpoint of my best biomechanical efficiency, I am going to get into a position that provides me really great balance, personally, for whichever style that I want. If I intend to want to go forward, I will have one type of foot position and body angle, and a little bit different for back. But basically speaking, I'm here in a very, very balanced position. I'm going to take my arm and bring it up, elbow to knee, hand to foot. I'm not saying that you guys should do this. I'm saying this, for me, is a minimization.
So, Miguel's talking about a particular style, right? What he's not telling you, what he's saying is, he's not saying to do it this way. What he's saying is a fact. If if you are starting from here, it takes longer to move your arm to here. If I start my arm here, it takes less time. It's a fact. It doesn't really matter what your style is, but what he is talking about is, this is how he fights. He's not saying to do this style. You've got to do your own thing, but it is a fact, whether it's good or bad, that point A to point B, the shortest distance you have to travel is the fastest.
And so from here, it's much easier to extend with minimal tail area. So that means that whenever you're in your right form, don't pull back to throw. One, it's inefficient when it can save energy. And two, it tells him exactly what's going on. So there's two major components, whether it's heavy weapons, light weapons, fighting with a dagger, street fighting, whatever it is that this minimizing your wasted energy. Mobius talks a lot about energy states. Controlling the energy is, you have to as you get older, but I think the more important point is that it minimizes, it maximizes the speed that you're going to get out of it. It minimizes, and it minimizes your opponent's reaction time and the amount of energy you're spending doing it. So that, honestly, that's one of the biggest, the key elements of fighting is this minimization of energy. It's through telegraphs. How many of you are good at picking up on telegraphs? Other people's telegraphs?
What's the number one telegraph you see? Throw it out.
Probably pulling the hand back before you can.
Okay, what's another telegraph?
Proper shoulder.
Moving the leg forward.
Body, which leg?
Leaning forward. It depends. Sometimes you start seeing that movement even before they're even in motion. Or if they're in a reverse stance, they start bringing that other one around.
Or body moving beforehand.
Yeah. So I think you hit on the big three: the elbow, the shoulder, and the knee. That's the big three. But what else?
Wiggling the dagger a couple times before they actually use it.
Tapping.
Patterns.
So
And that's a brilliant one. That's a more complex one because you can actually, and you can use any of these, but you can use these things that people will pick up on, flip it around and use it against them. If you know that they're always watching for you to move your foot before you attack, move your foot, then don't attack, or start to attack, and then do something else. So if you stagger. So if you have a weakness that you know that you do all the time, Connell, I'll throw her under the bus right now. She's really bad. She's got that instant, wants to pull the arm back.
We call it a hook. We call it a hook.
Yeah, it's you know, I don't know. I guess we're brought up to kids, and stuff. You know, and you're like, I must pull back the hip because then I'll get power out of it. You don't if you got a razor sharp tip. So that's a big one. So if you think that somebody's going to be watching you for that, fake them up and do it. Anything else? Any other movements? Good.
Just forward and backwards movement. Also, I caught somebody today during pickups. This is one I catch him with a lot. I did a little flinch or something, he went, and right back there. And he got here. As soon as his weight stopped and started to shift back forward, I blasted. He had no chance, none whatsoever. Just that little shift of movement. That's it. If I can tell when you're going to do it, and that's one of the biggest things about telegraphs and wasting energy. But it's also saying, here I come. This is what I'm doing. If I know what you're going to do, it's easy to beat.
So all these things are basically to still your body to make less drag in your fight.
When you're talking about, let me do this real quick. What gives your opponent a bigger advantage on you? Doing this or doing this? They're both telegraphs. Which one helps him and which one doesn't?
Back foot helps him.
How so?
Because that one actually increases the range of his lunge.
So people will cheat. So they'll get into stances slightly out of range of you, and they're not comfortable. And if you watch, they'll get frustrated at a certain range, and then they'll cheat. So I guess they're not thinking that you're going to notice that they go, and then reset. But they're 3 inches closer to fighting you. So you can use that clue as a trigger, and so you're watching for patterns and that kind of thing, which you can do strategically before the tournament, and then tactically within the tournament, and start watching for those little things, especially the back foot, because that can be killer. If they're sneaking their front foot forward, it really doesn't do anything, because I'm not gaining anything out of it, unless it's a stagger.
It might make the knee slightly more vulnerable, but that's about it.
Yeah, but that back foot moving forward.
So initial telegraphs that I personally look for, some of them are a little more subtle and they're a lot more difficult to pick up on because of the clothing and what have you, but tension, arm shifting forward, mentioned.
This talks to Modius's energy states. If you see people that are
Shifting
normally
away.
calm and they,
Vibrating,
yeah,
twitching.
So,
Feel better.
so a lot of people, what they're looking for with me is they're looking for me to not set. What everybody tells me that they tell everybody else, makes sense, is they don't want me to end up in this state. They don't want my back foot to get in a position, because if you watch me, I'm feeling the ground. I'm moving my foot around inside, and I'm looking for a place to launch. So I'm looking for anything that keeps my foot from moving so that I don't have to worry about that out here situation.
So what happens when we're fighting and you find a nice comfortable spot?
Miguel backs up, and he tries to draw me out of that comfortable spot because he doesn't want me to have, what he really wants is he doesn't want me to have time to check it. He wants me to come forward, basically I'm walking, I'm coming forward, and he wants me to, in this position right here, where I only have time to be in range. In other words, if I stand here at this range, I'll stand here all day. Miguel will eventually come forward, but it's going to take a while. But that talks to another, totally other thing.
We're talking about fight. I'm going to do something else with the barrier resistance. Is that should I get my ass kicked? Then I will get my ass kicked. I'm going to get beaten. This person will beat me. I can't beat this person.
I walk out on the field, and I win probably a good 30-35% of my fights as I walk out on the field.
It's attitude. You walk out like you on that field and understand. You don't have to. On the field is on your death zone, where your blade is in your death zone. Feel comfortable. Relax. Take the field and stand there. Smile and be pleasant. That gets you halfway to the fight.
If you come out against anybody in this room thinking you've lost the fight, you are absolutely correct.
I like it. This reaction will be a little slower, a little more hesitant.
We do not need your help. We don't.
I do.
Well,
Use one. Use
so,
it.
so
We don't need your help, so don't give it to us. Come out there believing you got a shot, because you do.
So these guys have shifted onto it's what I call the actual, when I talk about mindset, it's what I'm talking about, which is, okay, so I've gone through probably pretty much every mindset before I found one that worked for me. I went out there with, I'm not going to lose, and I lost. I went out there with, I'm going to win every fight, and I lost. I went out there with, I don't want to lose. Well, that got me beating a lot more than I don't want to, than I'm not going to lose. And eventually what worked for me is you're not going to touch me. You are not going to touch me at all. And I won my first Queens. When I won Queens, it was, I went out there with, I'm not kidding, I went there with, please don't let me suck.
That's mine. I just don't want to suck.
But what I actually entered the tournament with, that was an aside, was I'm not going to get touched today. I've got to live up to this expectation. I was getting my white scarf that day, and so for me it was a huge amount of pressure, and I was so scared, and I was so worried about just letting Miguel down and just really having a bad day. But ultimately it worked out. I did suck, and I only got touched twice, once on the finger, once in the arm. So I felt pretty good about that. But the mindset is really important, and for you, you've got to figure out what that is. For each person, it's different.
Yeah, it can be, but so this one's pretty good. So why would that particular one that he chose be a very good one? Well, it's black and white. It's clarity of purpose. You can say, I want to go out and win, but there's 1,000 things that might entail. So keep it simple for your brain. If they're not touching you, guess what? Eventually you will win. And so I think that it really simplifies it for the brain, right? Don't get hit, don't get hit, don't get hit, don't get hit. And eventually you'll score a shot. And now, this is not to say that that's kind of a water approach, right? Of more of a defensive and then respond. But you can use it as fire too. But the idea is that tantamount to your success is that you are not dead first.
So I have a slightly different mantra when I walk out on the field, especially in the crowd or say Queens. I shall impose my will upon my opponent today. It's all about my will versus yours. And my
For me, when I'm truly thinking, I walk on the field and go, this is my zone of death, come. And then I let everything relax and go, no mind. And then if I have to do something visually or mentally, I'll go. The other thing is never say ready till you're ready mentally. Ever.
And now, it actually goes back to one of the earliest points we made in the room, which is yours may be one thing normally, but when you're fighting one opponent, it may be totally different. And if you know that they break apart when they're being dominated, then you may take His Highness's approach on it. I like his approach because it's once again, it's more of a clarity of purpose. You have a mindset that you're just going to do what you want to do and force your opponent. As long as your brain can focus on that. I like this other one just personally because it's, if I'm not being hit, that frees my mind to do what it's supposed to.
You don't have to worry about calling good. You don't have to worry about thinking about that shot because if they're not touching you, there's nothing to call. There's no, that wasn't quite there, no, it was light, no, that was the arm. It's just thrown out the window.
Fun triggers that could hit you off. If you know you come to pieces, if somebody questions your blow, you need to deal with that.
The mentality that helped me, my mentality is different now, but the mentality that finally helped me get past the hump and when Queens was part of this, pretty simple. Had enough of this shit. I've done this tournament for 15 years, that's it, you're all dead. Any questions? That's it.
Any of you have any particular one that works best for you?
What do you do to close your mind off, to still your mind? And if not, that's what you need to work on in the next couple of months.
Come up with an absolute in your brain before the next tournament. And there were some great examples up here. But you may have one that works best for you. And fighting is, if nothing, very personalized. And schools train a particular style a lot of times and a mindset. And those work fantastic. You see lots of success inside the SEA and outside for various types of schools. Because they work on patterns and understanding and various things like that. But at the heart of things, you are all individual. You are not the same person. So you can take that learned training from your instructors, your masters, whatever, to a certain point. Then you have to turn out on your own. The things that you can do to turn that up to the next level is every time you learn something new, somebody tells you something new or you do something new, you need to understand how that impacts the entire game. If I move my foot an inch closer, I'm going to do a little exaggerated here. If I move my foot back foot an inch closer, what does that do for me? If I use a slightly heavier sword, what does it do? If I rotate my shoulders out, because of this guy said to do it, what else is going on behind the scenes? So by this questioning, you'll understand, and you won't just be a cookie cutter of somebody else who maybe they have developed it. Because if they developed it based off of, well, when I do this, then my opponent does something else, etc., and you don't know all of those things, then you're a poor copy. He was a poor copy of me for a while, and then he developed his own.
Tying directly to what he's saying, some of you may know this, some of you may not, but I'm a direct line from Brendan to Miguel. Miguel was Brendan's teacher, Brendan was mine. And if you notice, we don't fight anything alike. Any of us.
Matter of fact, though, he likes to point this out and he's giving me a hard time. I went through a period of time where I fought so much like Miguel that if you saw us from the back and we were both wearing red doublets, you would not have been able to tell us apart. Miguel's taller. But I don't have a lot of Miguel's physical attributes. I don't have Miguel's, for those that don't know Miguel and how he fights, his biggest strength is his reaction speed. He has the fastest reaction speed I've ever seen. He used to hit me in the head before I even knew that I was moving. Okay? So I would actually get hit not realizing that I was attacking because I got hit before I actually made the decision and committed to the attack. I was already started moving, but I didn't know it. But he would see it and just pop me. So, I forgot the time.
No, you're talking about creating drag. You created drag in your attack. He created less drag. His mind adapted and flowed. Was it open to receiving all the inputs and basically flowed to your attack?
So what I eventually did was I figured out how my body wants to move and what I can do naturally. So everybody brings something unique to the game. Their body can move in ways that find odd or weird or uncomfortable. And what each of us brings, that's our strength. What we do that's unique, that's where our strength lies. And what you want to do is you want to maximize what you can do well and minimize what you can't do. If you have a teacher that's showing you a particular move and it's uncomfortable, it just is. And to try to force it is not going to help your game. Understanding the move will, but utilizing it probably will end up getting you hit more often than not.
See, how are we on time? Pass.
Okay.
No, this is 2 hours. You've got 45 minutes.
So here's the thing is,
Princess, do you have?
No, it got moved.
Oh.
When the two classes were combined, I gave this in 2 hours and they're over there.
so here's
Very
the,
good,
here's
45
the
minutes.
situation. There was a fighter that was a superior fighter, probably the best technical fighter that I fought, or that I've ever fought, Christopher. How he was beaten is basically by stopping his clock from moving and throwing him off his game and killing him while he was resetting. So the thought process with the only way you can do that is flowing in combat, processing the data, and doing your action in one motion.
You could also get inside of his tempo. But his tempo was, he set a tempo and he drove the fight to that tempo. So in order to take that, you had to actually get inside the tempo. You couldn't try to change it because usually your tempo is going to lag. You actually had to get inside of his decision, basically inside of his...
Yeah.
So this is an example of not no mind, but during mid-fight, you're readjusting your fight's flow based on input that you have of the time, or basically attacking you to try and execute.
So what they're kind of hitting around now is the actual process that our brain goes through, or the brain can go through. Good training.
No, they're setting up so.
That your brain can go through to prepare within the fight. So we talked about the 3 levels, and I don't know if we have a whole lot of time to go over that. I'm not going to go over the 7 deadly sins and virtues here in a minute, but I want to talk a little bit about the OODA loop, and in part because it's a hard concept to get into your head apparently. But it's what I do, and I bet it's what a lot of the really top fighters do. And the OODA loop is a set of 4 steps that you do within the bout. So we talked about the 3 tiers: the strategy, the tactics, and then what you're actually doing while you're in the fight and moving around. And it's observe, orient, decide, and act.
So observe. What is observe?
So it's seeing what your opponent is doing, and in a way that, and it sounds obvious, but not just seeing you sitting there, but seeing what it is about the way you are sitting there that presents yourself as a weakness, or as a weakness that I can take advantage of, or a strength that I need to be worried about. Hence, if you just move your back foot forward, that could be either a strength or a weakness. If I notice it, it's a weakness. If I don't notice it, it's a strength for you. So that is the observer.
Orient.
Orient is then deciding what to do, that is putting that into the perspective of the fight. So it's kind of the cheat step between what you see and what you decide to do. So it's very quickly processing that information. So you observe it, your brain then goes, oh, that's what he's doing. And then the third step is you decide on what to do based on that. Okay.
Because I processed this about 3 months ago and I went, oh, that's what it was.
Yeah.
Have you read Ender's Game? Remember the balance technique where they basically figure out where the floor is? They figure out where their body position is in terms of where the target is? That's what we're doing in terms of orient. It's basically saying, where are we in relation to each other? What's happening in terms of relation to each other? Where am I in terms of that process?
What I interpret it to mean is specifically, how am I going to deal with them in the process of what I'm about to do when I decide what I'm going to do. So, as an example, if they orient their blade a little bit canted off to my left, I'm deciding in that process, I'm deciding what I'm going to do defensively to deal with them when I decide how I'm going to kill them in the process.
That's brilliant, good guys. I don't think I have ever described this very well. But if they come from this stance here to here, you observe it,
But, okay, the orientation is, now what can that do to me and what can I do to it?
So if I'm here and I'm matching, and I do nothing,
Then,
I'm not orienting myself.
right,
If I had
the first is, he observes me moving this way. Now, he went all the way through the OODA loop cycle. But if I move here, he has to very quickly observe the move, understand all of the pros and cons of the move, decide what to do, and act. The more quickly that you can do this, the faster that he can attack. So if he's used to me doing this kind of move, as I rotate out here, he kills me. Because I'm going this way, there's no way I can both be going this way and that way. So every time somebody goes like this, aha, kill him very, very quickly. And you can only do that by understanding what it is that you need to do. Does that make sense?
So understanding where there's the fact that what you're doing right now is not letting a threat, or moving a threat. That understanding also gives space the decision of hitting now.
Yeah. So he observes, he orients. That's a threat to me because he's going to try to come in from the outside angle. It's a strength from here if I let it, but it's a weakness because I know that if I stab him up the chest while he's doing that, I'm just fine. So he orients it, decides what to do, and acts right away.
His decision at that point would be the attack itself.
So this process, you can read up on it. It was invented by General Boyd, who was an Air Force fighter pilot, who invented this for jet fighting. And he had observed that, that this process speeded up his cycle time, is what you're talking about. And so, if you just let people do things and let it go, I'm going to fight my fight. And you hear this. How often, who has not heard this in the room? I'm just going to fight my fight from your opponent. If he fights just his fight and doesn't take into account what you're doing, you will kill him. And so, this OODA loop process is something that your brain should be doing all the time. And I would add that any time that your opponent does something, especially if you're working with them in a training environment, that you don't understand why he or she would be doing that, stop them and ask him.
So what?
Or ask, what did you see? When you killed me, what did you see? Did you trigger up to say, yeah, you did this?
What was his or her, process to understand that? But if they rotate out like this, you say, why did you do that? What do you hope to gain? What are the pros and cons? You look pretty open. And they're like, yeah, but you're a really good strip fencer. And watching the other fighters and seeing how people are feeling today and how you're feeling, etc.
Very forwards.
Yeah.
So as a point to this, Aaron earlier described, he had made the decision tactically that every time Sven tried to come into him, he was going to step. So when he observed him moving forward, his orientation was to shift forward. His decision about what to follow on was in that loop. That's where and I'll let him talk to that, but this specifically ties directly to what we're talking about.
I think you're sliding off, and which is why it's slightly confusing to talk about, because they're nearly simultaneous, but you have to go through the whole process. He observed Sven coming forward. His orientation, in part, was based off of an understanding of what he had pre-triggered to do, which is part of the training thing, the part of the pre-prep ahead of time. He was able to orient quickly because of this preparation that he had done ahead of time. And then as soon as the Sven came forward, he's like, danger, danger, danger. Decides what to do. Based off of his training, I'm going to go forward now. And then he acts on it. And it's all in the same moment, which is hard to separate it out. But it only works if you are putting it ahead of time. You're doing it step, step, step. Sven actually has a drill. Did you do that drill with him? Which drill? He's got this drill. It's a heavy weapons. It's a foam fighting drill. But he stands like this, he makes you stand like this. And he does this drill where, he takes a shot, then you take a shot, and back and forth. But what it is it's perfecting your speed from a particular position by minimizing telegraphs and maximizing the use of your quick twitch muscle and things like that. But the point of the exercise is such that whenever you get into this position, your brain knows exactly what to do. And by doing this, yeah, no mind. He's just hitting you. It's like, I think I'm pretty fast. I go up there and he's just hitting me. Well, I can't hit him with these foam swords.
So I think what you're describing for rapier would be something like this. So every time I attack, he's going to parry, and then he's going to, so it looks like this.
Yeah, yeah, actually, very, very much so. And you usually limit the range so that you can get the fastest things going on. But I'm supposed to throw, and all you have to do is parry. And then you get to throw, and then all I get to do is parry. And it goes back and forth like this. And it's a really good way.
If you want the penalty or...
Is it starting?
Yes.
It's a really good way of preparing for that fight. Thanks for doing it. I understand if anybody is going to go to the tees.
You're doing better already.
You guys go to.
Hi, thanks.